And we're on. Amanda Bossi, thanks for being on Fitness and Consciousness.
Oh, thank you for having me.
So you are the only one that you know of that went from severe Tourette's to coping so well that no one would know that about you by hanging around you and talking. And I'd be one of those. We talked for, it was like 2.5 hours yesterday in person at Starbucks. And if we weren't talking about your story, I wouldn't have had a clue that that was the story. So can you just talk about, like, I guess maybe we'll start with like where you started with, because you were on like a lot of medications and you decided to take yourself off of them and do your own thing. So can you just give us I guess like just a history of your story and what you're doing now?
Absolutely. So pretty much in the past, so I'm 26 now. When I was in middle school, I started to have these random urges that caused me to do things that I didn't want to do. And at the beginning, we didn't really know what it was because, your daughter has to do certain things that don't make sense. My parents didn't really know what was going on. And in that time, I became so just overwhelmed with my mental state. So my Tourette's became very severe. And in middle school, I had the urge to bite my tongue and box my nose, as well as mess with my ear. And with the middle school stressors and school in general, when I hopped into high school, it became very severe to the point where my tics were self-harming. So throughout high school, I had the tendencies of basically causing a lot of facial damage because my mind was so enveloped in these tics over and over again. It was repetitive and then with a lot of pain. So once my Tourette's became really self-harming, I then went to a psychiatric ward for, it was about 20 to 25 days. And in that institution, I had to go through a lot of strenuous tasks from doctors and put in padded rooms, told to stare at the wall. I had a ton of things that they forced me to do. And of course, for me at that time, which I've stated many times before, it felt like I was being punished for something that I had no control of at the time. And, that was very hard for me, being 15, 16 years old and having to go through this. And so throughout the hospital days, I had to follow tasks every single morning. In the daytime, had to try to stay awake with activities, just focus on ways to better my life because of people telling me what to do. And that was very difficult. And not to mention, I was watched throughout this whole process. When I slept, when I had to get ready for the day, there was always somebody paying attention, which was really difficult, and your independence is completely stripped from you. So by time I was released because of health insurance, and so I had to, basically be released earlier than expected, I found ways to follow through with techniques that I felt were better for me personally, in ways that I can live my life. And so in 2011, I took ownership of it on my own.
What I found interesting when you were telling me about like what you were doing, like it kind of made sense, like as a strength and conditioning instructor, we have these progressions. So if you want to bench press 300 pounds, we don't just, and if you just never done a bench press before, we don't just put 300 pounds on the bench press and good luck, just keep trying. We put maybe 100 pounds on there, and then we have these progressions that make sense, that are safe, and what you were telling me kind of seemed along those same lines, like the same kind of strategy almost. Can you talk about like what you were doing and how you were progressing from that to what you're doing now?
Yeah, of course. And that makes sense. The bench press, I mean, you're not going to tell somebody, hey, do this amount and see what happens. So with that being said, you have to really listen to yourself, listen to your inner being and what makes sense for your personal life. So what I did was very different as well from other people and what they're going through. So when it became really severe around 2011, I started to have a different approach to what I was going through. And I tell people my rock bottom was my breakthrough. So to be sitting on the couch as a 16-year-old, supposed to be enjoying your life, and instead I was in incredible amounts of pain. My brain wanted me to do things that I didn't want to do. And I had cuts and bruises all over myself and was on heavy doses of medication. That was a moment for me where I realized this is not the life that I'm supposed to be living. So at that point, I decided to teach myself these techniques, which includes paying attention to the ultimate goal, which was I want to be outside. I want to be living my life to the fullest without medication. I don't want to be on medication the rest of my life. And I certainly do not want to pay for medication the rest of my life. So it's kind of far-fetched, but the goal that I was shooting for was to live like everyone else. And so from that time, each day that continued, I would pay attention to how I was feeling. When an urge would come up, I would think about, okay, why am I doing this? Am I stressed? Was it something I ate? Was there something else that's triggering it? And I pay attention to those. And then from there, I start teaching myself techniques that make it easier as each day goes by. And pay attention to the little things. If something's stressing you, I would stay away from that. Same with food, dietary needs. And then that's when I decided to take myself off all medication, because I was already reaching a point of, wait a minute, I can do this myself. Like, this is really cool. I don't want to rely on anything. So let me go ahead and take matters into my own hands and go from there. So I could talk about the techniques for a really long time, but the fundamental, the sources that helped me were just to know I don't want to live this way. And it's amazing the transformation that takes place when you reach that state of inner knowingness, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and you work with kids at a camp in Atlanta they have Tourette's, and there was you said there was a boy there that had to he just had to press on the pressure point in the collarbone. So what happened with there, and when he tried that with you?
Well, so this was a few years back, camp in Athens, Georgia, and powerful camp of kids from all different ages. And I decided to one day try to see if one of my techniques that I taught myself back in the day, I wanted to see if it would do anything. And this little boy had the tendency to press on people's shoulders a specific way, along with various other things. And I decided to have him hold my hand, and I said, I want you to close your eyes with me, and I want you to envision pressing on my shoulder, because he wanted to come up and do that. And I wanted to see if that would work for him. So I told him, close your eyes, imagine pressing on my shoulder. And when I count to 3, I want you to release. And I want you to tell me what's going on in your head. So he presses on my hands really hard, and then I release on 3. And he looks at me and he says, I don't even have to do it anymore. What was that? And I told him that's just a way of coping and working with your thoughts on what you are wanting, like meeting your brain halfway, I like to call it. And while you meet it halfway, at the same time, you're not putting any pressure or, causing harm on anybody, as well as getting back to the day. So it's like those thoughts are racing, and you have to get those thoughts out, or else it'll become worse. So that's a way to work with the thoughts at the time, but then find an outlet in which is just very gentle. And then he went about the activity, and the rest of the day was fine.
Yeah. Was there, do you know if he was, since then, if he had tried anything else to try to keep from doing that shoulder thing?
I have no idea. Yeah. As soon as camp is done, we kind of all go off to our own places, and it's like a once a year finding time to get together and then catch up again. So I'm hoping that what I taught him a few years back is helping today.
Yeah, I think it would have to have at least planted a seed. So how old was he?
Around 9 to 11 years old.
Yeah, I would imagine it, because he went from he has to press on your shoulder, he just has to doesn't have to. So I would imagine that it at least would plant a seed. And when we were talking, I guess when I had heard about it before, I wouldn't have guessed that Tourette's would mean you have to do something to someone else. It was like these involuntary outbursts, yelling something, or making some kind of gestures or something like that. But I wouldn't have thought that it means that somebody would want to press on your shoulder a particular way. Is that a common thing, that I have to do something to you and everybody else that I meet, or is that?
It is very common. So social media, as you know, definitely likes to pick on the fact that it's a cursing disorder when it's not. And that's only found in 10% of cases. Now, to be considered having Tourette's and diagnosed with it, you have to have vocal and motor movements. So vocal with the sounds and words, and then motor, which is a broad range of different things that the body needs to do. So these tics, TIC, they can be a form of, moving your body part a certain way, twitching, blinking a ton, but they can also be, focused on somebody else as well. But it depends on the person and what they have. So for me, my Tourette's was wrapped around pain. So as soon as I would have pain on my face, it wanted to do it again, because that's what my brain wanted. So imagine, my tics being so self-harming on my personal being. Now for somebody else, they might need to, touch somebody else a few times. They might need to shove or, knock something over. It just depends. So you could have two people with Tourette's and it's not going to be the exact same because it's so broad. There's a lot of things that play into it.
Yeah, that was another interesting thing you were telling me yesterday, where, because we were talking about these progressions of where you like stop doing something. So it, like instead of like hitting yourself in the nose really hard, you got to where you could just kind of like rub your nose or touch your nose, and then finally maybe not even have to touch your nose at all, if I have that right. And so when I was thinking of like, well, how can we apply this to other things, and like the little thing we were planning on doing, but you're saying that like everybody's are so different, and like so it's hard. You have like this general idea, you're having trouble making a more exact method of here's specific examples of how you go from this to this to this. And one thing I was wondering is, like we were talking about, like saying like inappropriate things, like you refer to it as, well, you said it's not a cussing disorder, but
No.
well, it is, but I was telling you, like I was hearing something, I don't know if it was on another podcast or what, but this guy had to go to the emergency room, and his buddy that was taking him has Tourette's, and there was a black woman at the desk, and his friend with Tourette's just kept saying the N-word over and over again, and she's like, what? And he's like, oh, my friend has Tourette's, but I need help now. And I'm sure she understood. She's probably seen everything. And then you were talking about the situation being at an airport with a bunch of kids that have Tourette's. And so do you have like an idea of like, why do they want to do something inappropriate? Why, when they see a black person, they don't have a racist bone in their body, why do they just want to start saying the N-word? And at the airport, they want to yell bomb. And is there a reason why? And then have you thought of like, well, maybe we can like start this, like, I don't know if you want to call it a treatment or a strategy to like address these extremes first, like social behaviors. And I think I threw a lot of stuff at you there, but if you want to just.
Yeah, well, so that, I apologize for that. So pretty much going off of the story you told me about, with individuals who need to say certain things, it's very much identical to telling a child, don't touch that hot stove. They're going to want to do it more, If you want a cookie from the cookie jar, you're going to get it. You have to, it's your brain's way of saying like, no, that it makes me want to do it more. So how I've come to understand it, because there's a lot of things I'm still learning, and it's really intriguing actually. And so with somebody who has to say certain sounds or make sounds and then say certain words that are really inappropriate, it's kind of one of those things that you know that it's not something you ought to say. Therefore, you're going to want to say it more. And the more you try to hold that in, the brain's system of needing to let that tick out is going to be even stronger. So the techniques in which I'm currently trying to work out in a platform of just knowing how to work with these individuals, it's something that everyone's different, so I would have to have a better idea of what somebody's going through. But my method is to find a way to approach it in a healthful way. Instead of saying, oh, stop doing that because, that's not going to work. In fact, that's going to make it worse off. I want to find a way to help people to help themselves with that urge. If there's something like yelling out a specific phrase that might be inappropriate, it's focusing on ways to maneuver that and having them or helping them to understand why they need to do that. And the more you work on it, the easier it will become. At first, it might be difficult, of course, because, you know, it's trying to train your brain to do something it doesn't want to do. And so, for instance, if you have a certain word and you want to change that word, maybe change the lettering. Maybe try to find a way that the brain is still getting that urge off its out of its thoughts, like getting that out without making an impact that is a little far for society or being outdoors around other people.
Yeah, that makes sense. There's you were saying that like a lot of people like don't believe your story, like doctors are not really interested in hearing about it or believing you, and maybe parents and other people are that with kids with it are not very receptive. They think maybe that because your case was severe and you went to nobody would guess that you had it, and you're the only one that you know of in that situation. So there's a lot of people aren't believing you, but you were talking about how your dad just met this doctor somehow that was very interested in your story. He is open-minded and was excited to meet with you. So it would be really interesting to see what you come up with, because there may be some things that he knows that you don't understand yet, and there's things that you understand certainly that he doesn't know, and he knows that. That's why he wants to work with you and offered to, you're planning on writing a book. He said he'd write the foreword, and so it'd be really cool to see what can come of that, because like you're talking about being on, I think you said like 30 medications, including a nicotine patch, and you never even smoked, but for some reason they're like, they want to give you it. And it's just really interesting. Like once you are able to systematize this more, maybe divide it into different kinds of tics, like maybe like there's like categories, and I don't really know anything about it except for what, talking to you, but maybe there's like make these like categories, and then like strategies for each category or something like that. These are probably things you already thought of, but I was just thinking as a movement instructor, and I'm thinking about like the myelin and how the myelin works in the brain. So like if you get a guitar and you want to play some Jimi Hendrix songs and you've never played anything before, it's like, yeah, I want to play this song. Well, you have to work on those circuits. You can have a guitar just like Jimi Hendrix, and you can have all the right tools, but it's a matter of like putting these things into practice and developing new, like the neuromuscular connection and the way the myelin wraps around the, in the brain. And there's, it just seems like there's a lot of potential for what you're doing. And so can you maybe talk about like why, other than what I just said, like why do people like resist believing you when you're telling them that, yeah, I went from a severe case to, and they've, maybe been hanging out with you for the whole day, and like you couldn't have had a severe case because you don't have any tics.
Right. I know that people are very open to what I have to say. And I know that some cases at first when I talk with people, it's not that they don't believe me, I would say. It's more of, wow, that was you. And you went from that to talking with me and you're completely fine.
Mm-hmm.
And it comes down to that one word that really just throws a lot of people off in our lives, and that is the word fear. It's easy to fear those things that don't make sense, or those things that the work you have to put into getting where you want to be. And I would say that a lot of people may resist what I am saying and the things that I want to teach this population, because there's a lot of work that goes into it. And the cases for every single individual that suffers with Tourette's is so different from one another. So this is a lot on my hands too, because of course, I don't know all there is to know, but yet I'm willing to learn. I'm willing to work with whomever to find that balance with them so that they can get back to their lives and enjoy, their self-worth, their confidence, and getting back to where they need to be. So I would say that a lot of people may feel a little bit of a resistance, or, kind of just a push a little bit, because they're not yet ready for that step. And it's going to be a lot to take on. And, I understand a parent's perspective, because, watching your child suffer is enough. I can't even imagine what that would feel like. I saw my parents, they went through a lot with me. And it's not just the children that go through it. It's not just, teenagers that go through it and adults with Tourette's. It's everybody else around them that have a lot to play with their lives. The parents take on just as much as the child does. So, for someone like myself to come out in the open with, hey, I want to do X, Y, and Z and see if this is going to help, it might come off a little bit too much at first, because there's going to be a feeling of, is what you're teaching guaranteed, Amanda? Like, how do I know that this is going to help? And the thing is, you have to have a form of faith and being willing to take that step with me to see if this is going to benefit your child. I told you yesterday that I have a lot of questions in the back of my mind, very goal-oriented. I was since I was a teenager. And I think of the overall outcome of things. Like, where is the population of people with Tourette syndrome? Where are we going to end up down the line? Because there's so much that plays into life right now. We have the school systems, we have relationship stuff, just the community, and people want acceptance, but there's so much more that plays into a person's overall well-being. And my job, I feel, is to help people to take that step in the right direction and focus on those things that have been making their day-to-day life strenuous because of their tics. I want to help with the severe stuff, as well as anything else that is holding them back.
Yeah, you mentioned relationships, and we kind of talked about it a little bit before we started. And like, if somebody has a relationship, whether they're so like a boyfriend, girlfriend, partner kind of thing, or just a friend, or whatever, is there something like that people commonly do that they shouldn't do? Like, for instance, if you have a friend that stutters, I think you're not supposed to fill in the blanks for them. You're supposed to just let them get it out and not fill in the words that they're searching for. You're supposed to be quiet and let them get it out. Or if someone is blind, you're not supposed to change the way you talk. Because blind people will say, "Oh, I see." And you don't want to say, "Hey, do you want to come over and listen to the TV?" You ask the blind person, "Do you want to come over and watch TV?" They don't want you to change your language for them, because they use the language of sighted people also. And they don't want you to ask them to come over and listen to the TV. So is there something like with Tourette's that's like that? Is there something that people just commonly do it would help if they didn't?
I don't know the full answer to that because, everybody is so different.
What about saying stop it or something like that? Like you wouldn't want to.
Yeah, that's things to make it easier for within relationships. Um, that yeah, the saying stop is definitely not something that is good. And in fact, they would probably break up with the person and, walk the other direction. No, but there's certain things that play into it. You have to make sure that the partner you're with understands the certain triggers that will come up. And, there's things such as anxiety or social anxiety that plays a role as well. So sometimes someone's going to want to stay in and not go out as much. And other times, if you go out, there's going to be, moments that are a little too heavy, and the partner needs to understand that, okay, they need a break. Let's just walk over here from the noise. Let's, take a break and just get coffee instead of being on the go the whole day. There's things that play a role with the comfortability. And I think that's important to say and to note that you want to make sure that the partner understands every single thing regarding your Tourette's. And it's amazing that there are people that are completely 100% open to meeting you halfway, meeting you in the middle with where you are.
Yeah, I would think it could get if you're on a date with someone, you'd have to be, and they start doing something embarrassing or start saying the N word in front of the waiter that's black or something like that. I would imagine it takes maybe a lot of like being secure, like with yourself. Be like, yeah, this person's going to do this. It's not embarrassing. But where other people could say, oh, it was so embarrassing. Well, no, it's not. This is just the way this is. And feeling embarrassed about it is, wouldn't help anything either. Just like saying stop it. Cause you said it's kind of like telling somebody not to blink.
Yep.
Like they just have to do like whatever it is. And it's just as hard to stop blinking. So when you're like, when you're thinking of like when you're at the camp, and are you the only one that's like trying to help in this kind of way, or is it like the camp is just like, we're coming here to have fun. We're not coming here to like work on stuff. We're coming here to go down the water slide and swing on the rope, and we're here to, or is it like, yeah, here's some skills that we can work on?
This summer camp is based strictly around the pleasure of life and having fun at a summer camp with kids that are identical to you, without feeling like you're different. So the camp that this is at has multiple camps that fill in certain disorders and disabilities. So it definitely is beneficial to these kids' lives. But the summer camp that I attend is strictly based off of just the having fun with others.
Yeah, I think that would be helpful. And then if you're just so they can like relax and not have to worry about, because it probably would be besides the having the condition itself. You call it a condition, or like, is that the right way to word it?
Yeah, condition, disorder.
Yeah. So having that in itself, and for like the kid I was just talking about, not being embarrassed if you're out on a date with someone with Tourette's and they do whatever. But like I would imagine for that person with it, and they're out at like some restaurant and they start yelling something, and I would imagine like for them, like that would be just as traumatic as having the condition itself. And it's like these kids are used to like probably getting picked on, they're getting made fun of, they're going through all these traumatic things along with this major thing that's super stressful and traumatic anyways.
Right. And to add on to that, the more that they feel all this attention on them, or feeling like they know they don't want to do it. They know that people are looking at them like, what's going on? Yeah. And it makes it worse. And absolutely, I would say that for people to feel embarrassed, that's huge. And nobody ought to feel embarrassed. It's a part of them. And for me, like Tourette's is my sidekick. Like I just have taught myself ways to manage very well. And, it helps with my life because I'm able to do the things I need to do. But for all these other individuals, I turn into a mama bear almost. I'm very protective over this population, these individuals, because I know upfront what it's like when it's really, really bad. I know upfront what it's like being in public and people are looking at you like, why are you doing that? Or at school, the amount of teachers that don't understand other peers' perspectives, and you're trying to just like tame all this in because you don't want it to come off looking like you're ridiculous. You want to be like everybody else. So going back to what I would come into helping these people with, these cases, would be to first off tell them that it's completely okay of what they're doing, and that they shouldn't feel embarrassed, and that it's a part of them. And there's a way to go about acceptance within the community and in schools and getting people to understand with awareness. But where I come in is knowing that not everybody is going to be open to accepting a situation. Not everybody's going to be completely okay with verbal or motor movements. They're just not. And for my sake, I just chose, it was by choice to make adjustments in my own life, because I knew that if I continued the path I was on, it wouldn't have led to anything good. Because in my case, mine was very traumatic, to the point of having to stay inside all the time. And I just wanted to meet society in the middle as well. Like I want to go out and I want to do these things. I can't be causing a scene by punching my face. I just can't. So I would want to help them with those specific urges and finding a way of, okay, let's take you out of the classroom. Let's put you in a space that makes sense and then work from there. There's a way to say no, or enough is enough. There's too much triggering going on here, or this specific child is making fun of so-and-so. There has to be a method of targeting the actual problem. And I think it plays into the stress of the environment and helping them to get themselves back together, and then putting them out where they belong, like putting them back into classrooms, having them go to do those things that they wanted to do and they never thought they could. Like that's where I come in. That's like my role. I feel very driven in that area specifically. It's not to change them. It's to take those certain triggers that are too much and adjust that so that they can get back to their life.
You're talking about the triggers. I think maybe you're using it in a way that's not completely what most people are thinking about as a trigger, like what's commonly being called triggers. And so when we were talking about, you were saying something about like the triggers yesterday, and then I asked if, like, would there be like something that I would be doing that would trigger it? And you said no. But then like you were also talking about like these like situations like where they're at the airport, they want to yell bomb. They see a black person, they want to yell the N-word. So there are these. Are you calling those triggers also? Like, so you're putting these situations. I guess, can you just explain what more you mean by triggers, the different kinds of triggers, and how to avoid them or get used to them so they're not a trigger anymore?
Sure. Yeah, triggers can be pretty much everywhere. Okay, so, I discussed a tic is the urge, basically the movement or vocal words and phrases that you need to do. That's the tic. That's what your brain wants. The triggers are those things outside of yourself, like certain people or environments or where you are, that might make your tic want to come out more. So, for instance, if somebody needs to move their body a certain way, let's just say they have a trigger that makes it worse if somebody touches their shoulder gently. So if somebody touches that part of their body, it might trigger them to want to do it more. Just like when I was in the psychiatric ward, whenever someone would touch their nose gently or just have an itch, my brain would lock onto that and be like, wow, okay, yep, I know that's focused on the nose. The nose. Let's go crazy on it. And at the same time, you're trying to tame that. So, triggers can be just about everywhere. It just depends on the person. I've met people who have triggers regarding certain music, the sounds of things. If it's overload of sensory, if you're at a dance and there's a bunch of lights going on and off, and then the music is really loud, or there's a lot of people, those are all very much triggers for any tic that you would have. It's very common, in fact.
Oh, yeah. And so the idea is to be able to, like for like traumas and stuff, which seems to be related to, there's certainly traumas involved. So would you suggest like kind of get more and more used to this trigger? Like, I guess that's in like psychology, so someone is like afraid of heights or something like that. Well, today we're going to have you step up on this little stool. And then there's this, you just kind of get used to that. It's cool. And then you're walking up a ladder, and then you're on the Empire State Building looking out, and you're cured. It's like this progression of, so do you think like that's a strategy for this also, or does it just not work that way? Or
no, actually, in fact, Ryan, you have it down. It's taking the little bitty steps to do those things that you need to do. I have this, I don't know when it started, but over time with my experiences, I was able to tap into knowing what's enough or what needs changing, and what things that I can push a little bit more in without it blowing up in my face. So there are triggers that you could probably maneuver around. And that's where it goes back to, if I was able to work with certain people, I would have an idea what is too much for them. if you take little steps at a time, there's certain steps that might be too much for them. And I would have more understanding with it. So certain situations, like for my sake, I knew, okay, running a marathon in 95-degree weather, it's probably not a good idea because the heat will also trigger the same part of the brain, which Tourette's plays into. So instead of walking away from running just at all, I knew that the more I put effort into doing that thing I wanted to do, no matter the outcome of it, and paying attention to what I'm feeling while I'm running and keeping my brain on a very tight leash, like I like to say, it'll become easier. So I knew that, if somebody's going to say, no, you can't do that, that's going to make it worse, I'm going to be doing that thing because I want to tell my brain, like, listen, I'm in control, not you. That's why I have it tattooed on my wrist. Like, I have this warrior sense that I know what I want to do. If something's too difficult, I'm going to aim right at that thing. And you can only walk away from it for so long. If you run away from that problem, if you run away from what's going to make it worse, it's just going to get worse. And in fact, who knows what you can do if you get around it. We like to make mountains or molehills into mountains, I like to say, because there's ways to go about it. So on the other hand of that, if I was working with somebody who had the same struggle being outside and running and it was triggering them, there's a form of taking a break. If the amount of heat is too much, then I would pay attention to that and I would say, okay, let's take a break here, only go for a little bit of time. And then I want you to just stay away from being outside anymore. Like there's things that you will have to do. There's days where I have to tell myself no, because I know if I'm not leveled up and in balance with myself, then, the Tourette's will win. And I make sure to keep it a priority to keep myself at my goal, my level, I like to say. If I get down here, it's going to take too much time to get where I need to be. So I make sure it's right around this point.
Yeah, there was a couple things that you mentioned, like the ones like my brain is not in control, I am. So it's I am. So you're kind of recognizing like the part of you that's like your mind is not your brain. You can it's kind of like this weird thing. We control our brain with our brain, and we like analyze our brain with our brain. But then there's like this whatever the consciousness is, be able to control the brain with the brain, or like however that works out. But also you've talked about the diet, and when you were talking about the diet, it sounded very much to me like an anti-inflammatory diet. And something else that just popped into my mind when I was trying to remember that was like there's this a stem cell doctor, and he treats people with autism, and he treats people with all sorts of stuff. Maybe my shoulder's messed up, and so there's stem cells for like all kinds of things. But like his thing was if your child has autism, and his main clinic is in Panama, and there's he has some clinics here also in the States, but they can do more in Panama. They have different laws. And so he's like, okay, if your child has autism, then you can bring them here, but before you bring them here, you need to put him on an anti-inflammatory diet for 3 months. It needs to be strict. Don't come here and waste your money flying to Panama if you don't do this for 3 months first. And so anti-inflammatory stuff is getting more and more popular. There's more awareness about it. And Ori Hofmeckler, who I had on the podcast a few weeks ago, does a lot of great work. He has a book, The Anti-Inflammatory Diet, or it's a warrior diet, anti-estrogen diet, or like anti-inflammatory stuff people can just look up. But what you were describing to me was like you're talking about getting rid of you said dairy, gluten, like what all in the diet were you looking to get rid of that you saw? Because you're eliminating things like you were noticed like, oh, when I had dairy, then 3 hours later I started ticking or something, however you would put it. And so I quit dairy and it didn't work. But when I had this, gluten, a lot of gluten today, then the next day was bad for ticks. Is that how you went about systematically eliminating things one by one, or like what's the diet, your diet strategy?
My diet strategy today is, I have days that I am guilty of eating complete junk food, and it's not pretty, but because I feel tired and then fatigued, and I'm just not where I need to be. But I try to make sure I'm living a healthful lifestyle, which is making sure that I'm adding certain ingredients to my diet that I need, vegetables. Some people have certain things that they have to stay away from that are considered to be healthy. But I would say that you have to focus on how you're feeling no matter what it is. Because if I tell people to stay away from gluten, which gluten is one of those things that just, it's really terrible. And actually, Grain Brain is a really good book too, and it talks about a doctor who's worked with people, and Tourette syndrome is on there because it impacts the way you're thinking, and tic disorders as well play into could be to do with what you're eating or what you're ingesting too much of. And yeah, for healthful lifestyles and eating patterns, if I tell somebody to stay away from certain things, what happens if they're just dealing with a lot of internal stress? So if I say, oh, stay away from gluten because that's going to affect you, if they stay away from gluten and they're still having a rough time, let's look at everything else that's going on in your life. Oh, are you stressed? Is there a test coming up that you're not prepared for? Are you feeling like your hormone levels are not where they need to be? Those play into everything. So that's where you just have to focus on what your body is telling you, how everything else is looking, outside triggers, and it's staying in balance entirely. But I will say that for people to stay away from high loads of caffeine, high loads of sugar, and anything with dyes, red 40, blue 1, like too much of that is really going to put your brain in a state that it does not want to be in. And even today, if I have like a package of red licorice, like I know my brain's going to try to function with this and it's going to be on overload. And I would have to take a step back to say, okay, well, that's obviously not working for me. So you just have to pay attention. You have to become more aware of everything.
Yeah, that makes sense. And like maybe as you're like working on your book and stuff, you can make like what I've liked about Ori Hofmeckler's books was I think like the anti-estrogen diet for one, which is good for men and women, either one, but both are considered in this book. But it's almost like you could, like instead of trying to memorize everything, you could just kind of like go through it and kind of easily make a list out of this book. Like in a way, he could have made the book into a list. Don't do this. These are bad. These are good. And it's kind of really easy. So that might be a thing for you to consider also, is just have like this is what affected me. I don't know how it'll affect you, but this is why. And this stuff has inflammation in common. And I don't know that the red dyes are inflammatory exactly, but it does make sense because the FDA even says that an effect of those is hyperactivity in children. Like most of the dyes you look at, and this is the FDA saying that, not some crazy conspiracy thing or some kind of like woo science stuff. It's a lot of those dyes, the side effect or effect, however you want to think about it, is hyperactivity. And so that makes sense to me. We are coming up on about an hour. I'm not in any hurry or anything, but is there anything that we haven't touched on that you were wanting to get into?
I think we covered a good portion of it. There's so much to say on Tourette's in general, and I think it's so important to just to let people know that there is a way to go about, living a life that is something that you want to do, like living a life that makes you happy. And I wrote down a quote that it just speaks really true to my story and the things that I'm doing. And it's when you look at the things that are going on and the situations that are too much, when are we going to start asking those right questions? And I always say, do the unthinkable, rise above the norm, and transform your life. Because at the end of the day, nobody else is going to take that step but you. And even for me to say to others that you can do the same, it's up to them to want to do those things that'll make their lives healthier and feel more vibrant. And I'm here to just be that platform and that role model, the best that I can be, and to know that this is my life calling, and I want to help others to do the same.
Yeah, it's really cool if people can like really get their mind around, like, of all the cases, you're the only one that you know of that went from severe to no signs of it, like no, and it's just really amazing to me. So there is a way. So many people will say like this is incurable or something like that. I know you don't use the word cure. That word has a lot of
it's just incurable
baggage to
ways
it.
to cope. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and so it's really amazing. So how can people get a hold of you if they want to learn more?
Yeah, so right now I'm still continuing working on certain ideas, but I have my personal Facebook, Amanda Noel Bossi, as well as Instagram, which is Miss Brain Boss. But if you put my name on there, it'll pop up as well, and they can reach out to me that way.
Yeah, that's Bossi, Bossi. The spelling will be in the on the title, of course, and your contact information will be in the description section, and there can be like links on the YouTube and to be able to get to you to learn more. So is there anything else you wanted to end on?
I don't think so at this point. I just want to say thank you for having me on, and thank you for all the things that you're doing with the podcast as well and reaching out to everyone.
Yeah. Thanks for being on. This is really cool. It's a subject that, of course, since you're the only one that's done this, you're the first one I've had that's done this. So it's really cool for me to help you spread this message, and it goes out all over the world. And so hopefully the right people will hear it and be able to see kind of a light to start to follow. And I think that'll be really cool. So thanks again.
Oh, thank you.
I will stop the recording. I'll talk to you for a second when we're done.